So I know that these marks I've made so far are really pretty faint and you can't quite see them, or if you can see them, it's just barely, but really that's my goal. I want to just barely be able to see this information so that as I progress, these marks don't interfere with the marks that I really want to keep later on. So next step from gesture is to really think about that block-in stage. What are those primary forms that make up what's going on? So again, I can't see Dan's pelvis in this case, but I can see a good portion of his chest. It's pretty much straight on at me, but it is tilted at an angle, and I want to get that sense of the tilt. And I'm going to have to move the head over based on this. Still going to hit this top mark, but now I want to get this shape happening more over here. And again, try to see, I'm paying attention to that tilt that the head has. All right, not a ton of dimensionality to put into this particular drawing. By dimension, I mean showing that box turning in space. That kind of thing. This is fairly straightforward, so I'm going to just concern myself primarily with that front plane. It's facing directly at me. Okay. All right. More structures as I work away from the torso or the pelvis, if that's what you've got. I want to start attaching some of the other component pieces. You can think in terms of those French fry shapes that we played around with. And here with the arms, I can actually distinguish a bit of information between kind of a front plane and a side plane going back in space. That's what I'm trying to indicate as I block these pieces in. A bit of a structure of the neck. This block piece kind of the shoulder. Versus the block piece of his arm. And then if you remember kind of our lessons from I had to make sure I was recording. Lessons about foreshortening. I've got a foreshortening situation happening here. I'm going to think about what is the meat of the upper part of his forearm, right where the elbow is. How much of the upper arm does that block? Even think about his watch. How much of the bicep is that blocking? And then create the general structure of his hand coming down from there. Okay. Big thing that's blocking my view of his lower abdomen and his pelvis, of course, is this leg. And so I want to block in what it's doing as well. Remember, but the knees are basically square boxes. And then there's a nice curve to the leg, so I'm going to go ahead and keep that happening for now. And then foot coming away from that. Typically we want to think of the foot almost as a wedge, but I can't see a ton of the foot. I can't see much of the side of it either. So this wedge is, or this plane is still pretty much facing towards me. All right, somewhere behind this box is the bottom of the upper part of the leg, and it's extending back in space and disappearing in here. Right here is where the box of that other knee is wanting to happen. And then the bulk of that leg coming away. Take this on down, oh, somewhere in there. We get the basic kind of blocked in forms of that lower leg as well. And then that wedge shape that comes out. And becomes the foot, hitting my mark, or at least really close to it. That wedge is going to have a top plane and a side plane as well. And back over here, bumping into the squareness, the end of the wrist, and then the hand coming away from that. A little bit more on this hand here. I think it may have to end a little higher. Not sure yet. Haven't figured that part out. And so that's the basic block in. Again, all the players are on the field. I can clean up some of these extra marks at this point. They're causing me some trouble as far as visualizing everything. And right now I've got quite a bit of information on here that I can use to start thinking about accuracy. Some of what I was doing while I was in there was trying to see, you know, how much lower should this knee be than this point here? How does that interact? How does the knee interact with this piece? What are the negative shapes left in here? What are the negative shapes left in here? I'm looking at all of that as I develop the drawing. I'm doing that early on. I'm going to get more and more specific about that later, but I do want to make good guesses at this point. All right, a little bit more, some information about the chair. It's a little bit wider. I mean, I can really think about this almost as blocking in as well. What are the big blocks of shapes that make up what he's sitting on? Back legs, I don't care too much about. Eventually I'll find them too. Line up these legs, because chairs are usually square. Probably more like there. So that's the basic block in stage that's happening right there. At this point, I probably want to sharpen my pencil. so I can work with a nice sharp point the whole time and not have to get those big fat dull marks. The duller the pencil gets, especially with this 4B or a 3B or 2B, the more rounded that is, and the more likely it is that it's going to kind of push grooves into the paper that are really hard to erase and deal with later. So if I keep the pencil tip nice and sharp, I can keep making these really light marks that are going to help me instead of get in my way.